I met Marshall Pheasant at a construction site a few years ago. I was hired to do landscaping and residential landscaping in a new development in Forest Meadow, just west of town. The whole Forest Meadow area was a magnet for Californians fleeing the collapsing state with fists full of valuable real estate. They were moving to Central Oregon. Central Oregon has the perfect climate. It doesn't rain much here, but there's enough precipitation to give the mountains plenty of snow for skiers in the winter. Nearly 300 days a year are sunny. The cold winters provide a nice change of seasons. It's not unusual to be sitting in the sun one day and snowing the next. Vacations here are excellent. Snow powder for skiers, rivers, lakes, and hiking throughout the area are great for all types of outdoor recreation. There are some downsides to this migration. The main ones are rising real estate prices and Californians. I have noticed that drivers have become much ruder, more hurried. There has been a general arrogance that was rare 10 years ago. Now it's here to stay. The good news is that they have money and want things built. To me, that outweighs the negative byproducts. When I first met Marshall, I was 28. He must have been about 10 years older. A big, charismatic guy, a little loud, and generally in a good mood. He wasn't in the best of moods that day. He was yelling at the Finnish carpenter. I noticed the sloppy work when he was finishing the deck, but didn't say anything. "This is a luxury home," Marshall yelled. "How the hell do you find this quality of work acceptable?" He continued. They went outside so the carpenter could smoke. I heard the whole thing. "What are you waiting for, boy?" replied the carpenter between puffs. "This material is crap. You'll have to redo all the corners, and it's on you. I'm not paying for the remodeling you screwed up," growled a blushing Marshall. "Well, to hell with it," hissed the carpenter. "I'm out of here." He grabbed his tools and left. "Damn it," grumbled Marshall to himself. "Now what?" Then he looked at me. Then he looked at my work. All the corners were square and the spacing was just right. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and this open living space looked great, I have to say. At this point, we started talking. He asked if I could finish the kitchen. We toured it and familiarized ourselves with the project. Marshall pointed out places that needed to be corrected due to sloppy work. I saw another half-dozen places that needed help too. He asked how long it would take me to finish the job. "I estimate I'll have 30 hours to do it right," I told Marshall. "Nay." He stopped rubbing the back of his head for a moment, and I realized he was mentally calculating how much he'd get. "I pay $40 an hour, and you have 25 hours to get it all done," he told me. "No thanks," said I, and after gathering my tools, I headed for the trailer. Wait, he called out to me. "Okay, you have 30 hours. "Since this is our first job together," I said, "I'll give you my discounted rate of $60 an hour." That's what I told him. Eventually, we agreed on 30 hours at $50 an hour. I told him I would start tomorrow. I also gave him a list of materials I would need in the morning. When we shook hands, he said, "Boy, you didn't even tell me your name." He said, "Kevin Cotton," I told him. "I'm Marshall Pheasant," he told me. "Yeah, I know." That's how we met. That first year, I was working on a contract for Pheasant Construction. I still did some work on my own, but not as much. Marshall kept me on track. At the end of that first year, I realized something. I was making good money, there was plenty of work, but I wasn't growing my business. In a small construction business, the best way to build your brand is through word-of-mouth reputation. You do something good for someone and they tell their neighbor about it. The neighbor tells someone else, and your reputation grows. And with it, your business. I didn't have any of that. For clients, I was an employee of Pheasant Construction. The brand that was being built through my work was Pheasant Construction. I called Marshall and explained my situation. Over the past year, we had become, if not friends, certainly buddies. I'd met his wife, Belinda, visited his house, and sometimes had a beer after work. I told him I needed to cut back on my hours at Pheasant Construction. "I need to build my own business," I told him. "I like working for you, Marshall, but I need to think about my future." I could see that this shocked Marshall a little. He asked me not to make any final decisions yet. He asked me to meet with him tomorrow after work at the office. The next evening at the office, I met with Marshall and his older sister, Claudia Fazant Brown. I didn't know her very well. She rarely spoke to me. Claudia was in finance at Pheasant Construction. She did the bookkeeping, paid the bills, collected the money, and did payroll. Marshall, with great officiousness, asked me to sit down. He and Claudia had a proposition for me. Kevin, we want you to become a partner in Pheasant Construction, Marshall explained, grinning widely. I was a little puzzled by all of this. Partner? I interjected. Yes, Claudia has all the details, he said. She can give you the basics, and then we'll have our lawyer take care of all the legal details. What do you say? He reached across the table to shake my hand and smiled broadly again. The basics went like this. Marshall owned 60% of the business, Claudia owned 20%, and I owned the remaining 20%. The following Friday, we all met at the attorney's office and he read us the partnership agreement. I didn't understand everything. There were clauses about changing partnership interests, valuation depending on the business, annual meetings, subordinated loans, dividend distributions, and many other details. After a while, I didn't even try to figure it out. I just signed what I was told. During this whole process, I got the distinct impression that Claudia was angry about something. This anger seemed to be directed at me. I barely knew this woman. What could I do to her? A clear division of responsibilities quickly developed at Pheasant Construction. Claudia handled the accounting side of the business. I managed the field projects, often working on them myself. Marshall was in charge. He sold the work, met with vendors, communicated with builders, and built our brand. He was the face of the company. The red pheasant logo was clearly visible on all of our vehicles. They were easy to recognize. They were our brand. Through my work and Marshall's guidance, our business grew. Although some of the work was done by subcontractors, I hired a full-time employee to help me. My colleague was a young man I had worked with before. His name was Angel Menendez. Angel was a hard worker, a quick learner, and rarely spoke. I learned two things about him. One, he was married, had 2 young children, and was very devoted to his family. Two, he was also devoted to me. Business was at an all-time high. With the influx of Californians and others, our business was growing. We were known as a high-quality contractor. We were able to make a profit on our work, and we shared it as partners. Our brand was growing and we were making money. My life was great professionally, but in my early 30s I was single. There were a lot of young, attractive women in Central Oregon. There was a real bar scene downtown. I'd been to places like that a few times. It was fun, but not really my style. I preferred an active lifestyle. When I wasn't doing things outdoors, I was working on a small pre-war house I bought in an old neighborhood near downtown. I preferred to have barbecues with friends in the backyard rather than go to the fancy bars in town. The problem was that it was hard to make many acquaintances with this lifestyle. Part of my workday consisted of picking up materials from various vendors. Sometimes I had to stop by the big home goods store in town. There I happened to notice a pretty petite, dark-haired girl working in the paint department. Every time I went there, I tried to find an excuse to flirt with her and paint. I found out that her name was Tracy and that she had been working at Home Center for almost a year now. I also learned that she occasionally works part-time hanging wallpaper. I told her that I could use her for one of our jobs if she was interested. She replied that she was interested. Another thing I noticed was the lack of wedding rings. After a few weeks, we became friends and socialized regularly. One day, as we were chatting, a large, dark-haired supervisor scolded her for not paying attention to a customer. As we walked down the aisles, he cast a glance at me. Tracy thought he gave her a little scare. When the customer left, I asked, "Who was that guy?" "That's Chad. He's the coordinator for my department." Having said that, she looked around to make sure he wasn't beside her. "Chad gets mad if I don't do what he wants," she said. I noticed her blush slightly after saying that. I wondered what he wanted from her. Tracy was a little cutie. She had a sort of teenage girl innocence about her. She also had a youthful, girlish voice. Was this guy really trying to get her attention? "There he is," she said, and quickly stepped aside. "I'm out in 15 minutes. I don't want him to make me work a long shift," she said, giving me a quick, nervous smile. Walking away, I thought, what the hell? I'll ask her to go out to eat with me. She could always say no. No big deal. I retreated to the back of the store where the employee entrance is. About 20 minutes later, I saw her coming out, striding briskly toward a group of parked cars. I approached her and was about to call her name when Chad, The bulky store coordinator ran up and grabbed her by the shoulder, turning the diminutive Tracy around. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I figured it was a big sloppy asshole trying to bully an innocent girl. When I appeared, she shook her head, saying no. "Is everything okay here?" I asked calmly, looking at Tracy. "None of your business, buddy," Chad exclaimed. I looked at Tracy and she looked scared. "Are you okay?" I asked Tracy. She looked fearfully at Chad and at me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I wasn't paying attention to Chad. And then suddenly he grabbed my shoulder as if to turn me away from Tracy. So here are some physical stats. I'd estimate Chad's height to be about 6'3", 250 fairly soft pounds. One of those guys who is used to getting his way just by virtue of his scraggly physical size. On the other hand, my height is 6 feet, and my weight is 180 pounds. I gotta say, that's a pretty solid 180 pounds. So when this asshole grabs my shoulder, I jerk my arm away, elbowing him on the forearm, still looking only at Tracy. The shrug was pure instinct. When I turned to look at Chad, his face was flushed and furious. The punch was so slow and weak that I barely had time to dodge. My straight right kick to his soft belly made him flinch. I put my hand on Tracy's shoulder and pulled away. The last time I'd seen Chad, he'd been on his knees yelling that Tracy would lose his job and I'd be charged with assault. Luckily, I noticed a security camera almost directly above us. Since he grabbed Tracy and attacked me first, none of his threats bothered me. In a short period of time, several things happened. 1. Tracy was not fired. 2. She quit and got a better job. I helped her. 3. She focused more on her business, Tracy's wallscaping. I helped here too. 4. We became a couple. In those first few weeks, I learned a lot about Tracy. Her full name is Tracy Marie Talcott. She is an only child and was raised mostly without a father. Her mom lives in Prairie View, a desert town about an hour away. Her mom is a smoker living on the edge of poverty. All of their closeness is due to the fact that they are each other's only family. They have no common interests or special affection. We were married in a small ceremony. Her mom, my family, Marshall, and Belinda Pheasant and a few others attended, and I invited Angel and Inez Menendez. Angel and I worked together every day and a strong friendship developed between us. Life was good. Tracy and I became close. She was very loving in every way. I taught her about outdoor recreation, fishing, hiking, mountain biking, and other recreational activities we could get from living in Central Oregon. As we grew together, I learned other things about Tracy. To my surprise, the nightlife downtown attracted her more than it did me. Every once in a while, we'd stroll downtown to go to a restaurant or meet friends at a bar. Tracy's eyes would light up and she always wanted to stay there as long as possible. It was even enjoyable at first. I learned a few other things about Tracy. She was very neat and tidy in the kitchen, but her clothes were a mess in her closet and dresser. She was constantly losing her keys, phone, and sunglasses, but would only find them a few days later. Pheasant Construction was thriving. We had plenty of work and became known as high-quality builders and remodelers. Angel's carpentry skills were also improving. I was able to leave him on the job without worry. My day would start with Angel's early workout. I would head out to one of our subcontracting crews and guide them in the right direction. Then, I would head out on high-precision custom work. That fall, we had a very interesting custom project in the expensive Aspen Glen neighborhood. The lot had a small arroyo, or depression, almost in the center of where the house should ideally stand. I suggested to the owners that they cantilever the house over the depression and let a dry creek bed run under the house. They liked that idea. In essence, I was building a wooden bridge over the arroyo on which the house was to stand. The idea was ambitious, and I had to do some research on building bridge-like structures. Some structural design was included in the plan. Angel and I worked exclusively on it. It turned out very beautiful. The house was featured in a regional consumer magazine. Pheasant Construction was named one of the most advanced and innovative builders in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, Marshall was in his element, talking about how we like to push boundaries, create environments, merge with nature, etc. It didn't bother me that Marshall was taking credit for Angel and my skill set. I got a nice bonus, and he made sure that a significant portion of my bonus went to Angel. The demand for our services grew. We were able to raise our prices, and Angel and I received bonuses for every job we did. We were also able to choose which jobs to take on. In the fall of that year, I was due for an interior remodel of an office in a large house on a piece of land west of town. It was a high-precision job with high expectations. I was working on it alone. The client's name was Preston Balfour. Balfour made his money in real estate all over the West. He had lived in Central Oregon for almost 20 years, and his home was a huge ranch west of town. He wanted a mahogany-paneled office with built-in bookcases. You can imagine drinking fine cigars and brandy in such a room. Marshall told me we'd make the most money on it, but the client was very demanding. Preston liked me for some reason, and we had drinks together at the end of each day. One evening, he asked me some questions about my plans for my life and whether I had the courage to take the risk. I replied that I had a plan. I just haven't worked out all the details yet. I don't want to do manual labor at 50, I told him. I'd like to get land outside of town where I could build a store and work on things whenever I want. He looked at me with a wide grin on his face, nodding his head and just looking at me. What? I asked. I had no idea where this was going. Son, today might be your lucky day, he told me. Preston told us that he owned several thousand acres of land on which the house we were in stood. He was close to getting a building permit from the county. His neighbor, to the north, Abner Flint, was thinking of selling his 80-acre parcel on which stood the small house. Are you going to buy it? I asked Preston. That old asshole hates me. He'll never sell me the lot. He thinks I shot one of his dogs that got on my lot. He continued. He's been blowing me off every time he sees me ever since. Why does he think you shot his dog? I asked. Because I did, he replied. That was it. That 80 acres is a gold mine when the zoning passes. Flint doesn't know anything about it yet. Son, somebody's going to make a lot of money on that land. Why not you? We discussed it, and Preston said I needed $600,000. I had an idea of how I could raise that money. I remembered that my law partnership had an option to borrow against the stock. I thanked Preston and told him I needed to think it over. He nodded and told me to think fast. Old man Flint's land would soon increase in value eightfold. That night I went home and told Tracy about my conversation with Preston Balfour. I'm not sure she caught all the details, but she must have sensed my excitement, and it excited her too. She also caught the idea of getting rich. The next day, I called Marshall and told him I had something I wanted to discuss with him over lunch. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the office. I thought about asking Marshall to join me in the venture to buy the Flint land. As I considered this option, I came to a certain conclusion. Although I liked Marshall and we were partners, I couldn't say I trusted him completely. Over lunch, I told him I'd like to inquire about the possibility of a loan secured by my equity in Pheasant Construction. How much money are we talking about, Kevin? Marshall asked. What that? Well, I'd like to see if I could get $600,000, I told him. Marshall almost choked on his food. $600K, he hissed. Kevin, that's a hell of a lot of money. What are you going to do with $600K? That's where things got confusing. I didn't want to tell him what I was doing, but I didn't want to lie to him either. I was kind of mixing the truth with a lie. There's a piece of land I want to buy and eventually build a house and a store on it. It was all true. I just left out the building part. I don't know, Kevin. I think it's a lot of money for our business. I need to talk to Claudia about all of this. He wasn't optimistic. We ended up talking business for a while longer. Out of the blue, Marshall invited Tracy and I to spend a week in Cabo with him and Belinda the first week of January. They had a villa for rent. All we had to do was pay for the flight. I told him I would talk to Tracy. As we left, Marshall patted me on the shoulder and said with a sincere look that he would consider a loan, but not to get my hopes up. That night I was excited about the trip but sad about the loan. Tracy was excited about the trip to Cabo and not as upset about the loan. She was already planning what she would take with her to Mexico. The next day, in the middle of the afternoon, Marshall called me and asked me to come to the office after work and meet with him and Claudia. It was to be about the loan. I arrived a little after 5 p.m. Claudia greeted me much friendlier than usual. I hadn't been in the office much, but every time I had interacted with Claudia, it had been businesslike at best, and often downright hostile. Tonight was different. How was your day, Kevin? she asked almost affectionately. Not bad, I replied, and began to tell her about our projects. She nodded and smiled at me, but I was sure she wasn't paying much attention to what I was saying. At that moment, Marshall picked up the phone and we all walked into his office. Marshall had a wide, charismatic grin on his face, and on his desk was a folder of documents. Kevin, Marshall began, Claudia and I have discussed your loan request. We take these matters very seriously. The happiness of our employees, I meant partners, is very important. I want Pheasant Construction to be a family atmosphere, not just a workplace. It sounded positive, almost too good to be true. Your equity is 20%. Our bank and CPA valued the business at $2.4 million. Your equity at 100% is $480,000. That's the maximum we can give you. Now, he then opened a file folder and handed me a check for $490,000. I've included a year-end bonus of $10,000 for you. I also have a check for $5,000 for Angel. I was hoping you would present it to him. And now Claudia has brought us all some papers for us to sign. That was the end of it. I was very excited and nervous. Everything seemed to be going too smoothly. I signed a few different documents. Honestly, I didn't understand much of what I was signing. I guess I just trusted Marshall and Claudia. Marshall invited me to have dinner with him and Claudia, but I declined. Have you bought your tickets to Cabo yet? Marshall asked as we parted ways. I replied that we would by the end of the week. I was in a good mood. My financial dreams were getting closer and closer. I loved Tracy and was making her happy with this trip. And the work was great. I loved what I was doing. I was glad Angel was doing so well, and I was feeling good about my business relationship with Pheasant Construction. So what could have gone wrong? The day after working on Preston's research, we had a drink. I told him I had $490,000. Son, you're going to need all that $600,000. Old man Flint isn't that smart, but he's stubborn. You're going to need another $110,000, he told me. For a while, we sat in silence. What's your equity on a house in town? He asked. I hadn't thought about it. I originally bought the house for $175,000. With the improvements I'd made, it should have been worth more than $300,000. You're right, I said. I could take out a loan against it and get $110,000. Or sell it and live in the Flint house while you build your store. Whatever he did, Abner Flint kept his property in good order. I've never been there, but I'll bet the house is in good condition, Preston added. I wasn't thinking of living there. My goal of owning the land was suddenly fast approaching. But would Tracy like it here? I know she likes the hustle and bustle of the city, but I assume she shares my dream of land and financial independence. At least I hope so. Over the next few weeks, I contacted Abner Flint and made him a full-price offer. I put the house on the market, and within 24 hours, I received several offers, all above the asking price. Tracy seemed excited, but I noticed some hesitation. All this time, I was running my personal business separate from Pheasant Construction. During this process, I continued to seek Preston's advice. He proved to be extremely helpful. With the help of his attorney, I formalized the purchase of the land as an LLC, of which I was 100% owner. I did not understand all the details of my loan through Pheasant Construction. I told Preston that I wanted to make sure that Marshall could not somehow take possession of my land. Preston assured me that no one but me had rights to the land until I decided to sell it. On New Year's Eve, we made a deal to sell the property in Flint. Abner said he would be gone until January 2nd. Our flight to Cabo was leaving on January 5th, and we had to vacate the house in the city by February 5th. Everything worked out just fine. On January 3rd, Tracy and I drove to the subdivision. It was about 15 miles out of town. As we drove, all Tracy talked about was the trip to Mexico. She had only flown once before. We had to get an expedited passport for Tracy. She was very excited and nervous. It was an unseasonably warm January day in Central Oregon. We toured the house first. Preston was right. It was neat as a pin, but very dated. I enthusiastically started talking about how we could renovate it. Tracy only nodded her head, but not as enthusiastically as I was. Tropical Mexico is a sensory overload. The warm to hot weather and gorgeous blue ocean water was breathtaking. For Tracy, who rarely traveled outside of our county, Cabo was an exotic wonderland. The few times she had been to the Oregon coast, the water temperature had never exceeded 50 degrees. The 80-degree Mexican Ocean was intoxicating. The oceanfront villa was gorgeous too. We had a private balcony in the bedroom and a hot tub in the bathroom. The living room had a large sun deck overlooking the ocean. Belinda used to sunbathe on this terrace. In the mornings, we took long walks on the beach or explored downtown Cabo. One morning, we took a water cab to Lover's Beach. We saw the rugged side of the Pacific Ocean. We had been warned about the dangers of this part of the beach. About half the time, we were joined by Marshall and Belinda, but we realized we could each go about our own business. Usually, by mid-afternoon, the booze started flowing by the river. It was paradise. Tropical drinks, beautiful ocean views, and wonderfully warm weather. No stress. We all became comfortable with each other. We had spent time with Marshall and Belinda before, but when you spend a long time with someone, you can get used to them and feel comfortable around them. In Belinda's case, we found that she became very comfortable. Belinda was in her early 30s, I realized. Attractive and slim. She didn't have the thinness that Tracy had, but she was shapely. One evening, after a long day of beach sun and fun, we all probably had too much to drink. We were cooking dinner at the villa and everyone was in a good mood. Belinda asked Marshall to open a jar of salsa that was stuck. He couldn't open it. Then she asked me. I opened it. A tipsy Belinda hugged me and kissed me, thankfully on the cheek. Giggling, she staggered off into the kitchen. Marshall laughed at the whole scene, and then I looked at Tracy. She was looking at me and also at Belinda. I went over to her to give her a hug, but she pulled away. All that evening, she was silent. I tried to pay more attention to her. "Tracy, what's wrong?" I asked later that night. She only shrugged and released herself from my embrace. "Do you want to go for a walk on the beach?" I asked. It was something she liked to do when the sun was setting. She didn't answer. "How about we go to bed a little early?" "If you know what I mean," I asked with a chuckle. "No thanks," she said. What have I done? The rest of the vacation went great, and soon we were on our way home. Back in Central Oregon, in addition to our regular jobs, we had to pack up the house we sold in town and move to a new place out of town. I was excited about the move, but Tracy, back from vacation, looked a little depressed. We moved into the old Flint house and had a few things to do. I told Tracy that we would be building a new house in the next few years. The old Flint house was temporary. There were times when our goals and dreams aligned, but there were also times when Tracy said something that made me think that maybe they weren't quite the same. Suddenly we were both busy with work. In addition to her part-time job at Venza Paint and Tile, Tracy was also recruiting clients for Tracy's wallscaping. She was painting and wallpapering and was also quite good at Venetian plaster. Pheasant construction was thriving. By March, we were busy most of the year, and we were picking and choosing jobs. Angel and I were mostly doing custom finishes on high-end homes. Marshall and I were discussing the possibility of hiring an in-house designer. Marshall also wanted to hire more production staff. There was still something wrong with Tracy. The transition must have taken her a long time. I didn't see a happy and cheerful Tracy as often as I used to. I kept reminding her of our long-term goals. One day in mid-spring, Tracy called me at work and asked if we could meet in town at Blacksmith's for dinner one night. "What's the occasion?" I asked. Blacksmith's was a very nice restaurant. "It's on me," she said. "I want to talk to you about something." "Don't worry, I think you'll like it. But I want to talk to you about it over dinner." "Okay," I said. "Very mysterious." She laughed and hung up. And that night we had a delicious dinner at the Blacksmith's restaurant. All through dinner I tried to get her to tell me what she wanted to talk to me about. Finally, as we were about to finish, she spoke nervously. "Kevin," she began, "you know I've always wished I had bigger breasts." "I know, Tracy, but it doesn't matter to me. I like you just the way you are," I told her. "You say that because you love me, but I think you'd like it," she said. I didn't say anything back. I wanted to see where this was going. Yesterday, I met with a plastic surgeon, Dr. Daniel St. Pierre. Their clinic is right next to Franciscan Hospital. He said I was the perfect candidate, she said excitedly. The procedure will cost $8,000. I saved that money on my business. There are all kinds of implants, she told me. She then went on to talk about gel, silicone, and saline, different CC sizes, what size would be too big, recovery time, and so on. I didn't care at all. If it made Tracy happy, I'd probably be all for it, but I couldn't help but wonder if the whole trip to Mexico had put her in that frame of mind. She had surgery. It was outpatient. Dr. St. Pierre said she was feeling great and that everything went well. She was bandaged up for a few days. Tracy took a week off work to recover. For several weeks, she was not allowed to bend over or lift anything. Finally, one Saturday morning, I returned from working outside one Saturday morning. I walked into the house and there stood Tracy with her new update. I was a little surprised. She looked good. She kept looking at me. She was proud of her new body and wanted me to approve of her improved appearance. "Wow," I said, still in mild shock. "Tracy, honey, you look great." She did look good, just different. I guess it would take some getting used to. If Tracy was happy and it helped her get out of her slumber, I was happy too. Life went on. Working at Pheasant Construction was good, but so stressful. Angel and I worked hard and built beautiful structures, and we were making good money. Tracy seemed happier and more confident at first. Her business was growing too. One evening, we met downtown for dinner and I was running late. I told her to get something to drink and wait at the bar and I'd be there soon. The bar faced the sidewalk, and as I walked to the door through the windows, I saw Tracy sitting behind the bar. Some cute guy was chatting with her. No surprise, she looked good. What was surprising was the way she was playing along with him, almost flirting. I walked in, pushed the jerk aside and kissed her. Tracy tried to introduce me to Jackson, and I just nodded as we headed to our table for dinner. I was glad that Tracy was becoming more confident. I, on the other hand, needed to think about how to flirt some more. Tracy started asking me about our new home. She also started asking me about the big project that Preston had originally told me about. Honestly, I was so busy at Pheasant Construction that I didn't even think about it. The following Sunday morning, I met with Preston Balfour for a cup of coffee. We talked about a lot of things. With Preston, he steers the conversation in the direction he wants it to go, and you just participate in the conversation. I ended up asking him about zoning changes in the county. "Son, we have some good news and some not so good news," he said. "The good news is that all the commissioners like the idea. We will increase the county's tax base. The bad news is that one of the commissioners is resigning midterm for health reasons. The interim commission member is a tree advocate, Margaret Plum. She was something of a hippie in her youth. She might not be as friendly to progress. We'll have to wait and see." This was not good news. Life went on. Work was good. We were busy, making money and building some very nice things. Other aspects of my life were not so positive. Obviously, the uncertain news about my land and county zoning was not what I wanted. I wanted to start building our new house, but even with the money I was making at Pheasant, I still didn't have the money to build the house I wanted for Tracy and me. And come to think of it, it looks like we were supposed to split the dividends. I'll have to remember to talk to Marshall or Claudia about the status of that issue. And then Tracy showed up. I guess we weren't having as good a time as we used to. She was doing well, and she was getting more and more confident. I wanted to go camping, fishing, mountain biking, or just spend time together at home. She seemed happiest when she would dress up and we would go out to restaurants downtown. She had always looked good, and now with her new physique, she was attracting a lot of attention. While I didn't doubt her fidelity, I noticed that she seemed to enjoy the attention of other men. In early September, we hired a new employee at Pheasant. The new employee's name is Iris Pheasant Brown. She is Claudia's daughter and a recent college graduate. Iris has a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture. I later learned that she plans to return to college in a few years to get her master's degree. Claudia introduced us at our monthly meeting. "Kevin, I want you to meet my daughter Iris Pheasant Brown." At those words, she almost bowed as if I was meeting royalty. "Hi, I'm Iris Brown." She smiled and looked me straight in the eye, extending her hand for a firm shake. So far she didn't look like her mother, and that was a good thing. We went about our usual business. We worked on the schedule a bit and talked about the upcoming construction. As I got up to leave, Claudia came up to me. Kevin, just because Iris is on staff doesn't mean you have to call about every little issue, she said imperiously. Mother of God, Iris exclaimed. Iris then looked at me. Kevin, if there is anything I can do to help, please call me anytime. I've seen some of your work and you're really good. That's one of the main reasons why I'm glad to work here, she told me. Well, I just know you're going to be busy, Claudia mewed. Iris ignored her mother, shook my hand and said, It's nice to meet Kevin. That was the end of it. We were still busy, and the workload continued to be stressful. Angel and I were focused on quality. Marshall was focused on volume and the money it brought in. Conflicts arose because of this. It was also affecting my relationship with Tracy and me. She was busy with her business too, but not as much as I was. I know she didn't like being home alone on weekends while I worked. In mid-October, I planned a weekend getaway. The weather this time of year can be unpredictable. It can be 70 degrees or cold. This Saturday was perfect. Tracy was in a good mood and so was I. Mid-morning, she came up behind me and put a blindfold on my eyes. Leave the blindfold on, count to 200, and then find me, she whispered in my ear. I smiled as I heard the door close. I was almost to 200 when the phone rang, a customer with a problem. It was quite minor, but some of these people with money were so narcissistic they thought the whole world revolved around them. He kept me on the phone for a while. So after no more than 10 or 15 minutes, I calmed him down and walked out. Just as I was about to go looking for Tracy, she burst into the house, crying and angry. She looked at me with eyes full of tears and locked herself in her bedroom. I was at a loss. What had I done? I was a few minutes late, but why all the tears and anger? I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. Finally, 2 hours later, she came out, slightly dressed up for Saturday. Tracy, honey, I'm so sorry, I said. I promised you I wouldn't work and I got a call from some asshole client about something trivial. I promised not to work all weekend anymore. I understand, she said. It's okay, I overreacted. And she gave me a brief smile. I took her in my arms and hugged her. She hugged me back, perhaps with less enthusiasm. What would you like to do this afternoon? I asked, hoping I could salvage the weekend. I need to run some errands in town, she said. I won't be long. When I asked if she wanted to keep me company, she happily but firmly declined. There was always something to do around the house, and I dove headfirst into housework. Suddenly, I realized it was late evening. It wasn't dark yet, but it was starting to get light. I hadn't noticed Tracy come home, and I hadn't heard from her. Huh? Checking the time, I saw it was 4:45. I called her, but the call went straight to voicemail. I texted her a message. Hi, where are you? What are your dinner plans? By my count, she'd been gone almost 6 hours. That's a hell of a lot. I kept checking to see if there was a response, but no calls or texts. I went back to the house, showered, and changed, but still nothing. Now I was starting to worry that something might have happened to her. If you run a thought like that in your brain, your imagination can run wild. I began to worry even more. After another attempt to contact her on the phone failed, I decided to drive into town and see if there was an accident. By this time, it was already 7 o'clock and it was getting dark outside. I took the highway into town, moving slowly so I could at least see something on the side of the road. I got to town, but found nothing. I sat down for a moment to think about where she might be. As I pondered this, I realized that Tracy really didn't have any friends that I knew of. There was no one I could imagine her with. If I hadn't been so anxious, I might have pondered the sadness a little more deeply. Finally, I drove back to our house, checking for any signs on the road along the way. I thought about calling the police, but realized she would have to be gone a lot longer than she was now to get any results. I decided to have dinner. I cooked enough to make enough for a plate for Tracy. Afterward, I sipped my beer and waited. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, Tracy was walking through the front door. Coming out of my evening nap, I lost my bearings for a moment. Hi, honey, I'm home, she giggled. What's wrong? I asked. I was worried about you. Are you okay? Didn't you get my messages? I continued. I'm so sorry, honey. And she kissed my cheek. The faint odor of alcohol? Time got away from me, she explained with a wide smile on her face. I watched her, a slightly uncertain gait. Her eyes were a little glassy. She seemed to be on the road to drunkenness. "Have you been drinking?" I asked. "A little," she giggled. "I had some wine at dinner." "Tracy," I said firmly, not quite yelling, "I was worried about you. After I hadn't heard from you, I drove down the highway looking for you." "Why would you have to look for me?" she asked with an amused look of bewilderment on her face. "I was fine," she replied. I got angry, and the conversation went on from there. Eventually, I started yelling, and she didn't seem to realize what she had done wrong. She said she had been shopping and decided to have dinner at Pizzazz, an Italian place in town with a small pickup bar. She said she only had 2 glasses of wine, but I doubt it was that much. Eventually, we just stopped talking to each other. I was angry, and she was angry that I was angry. She didn't understand what was bothering me or why I was angry. Furthermore, I had never seen this kind of behavior from Tracy. We ended up having one of those cold wars that married couples have for days. You know how it is. You gradually start to be more civil to your spouse until you reach a normal level of affection. Despite the normal level, I saw a side of Tracy that I hadn't encountered before, and I had some concerns. River Ridge was a new luxury development in the northwest part of the city. They were expensive, custom-built luxury homes. Many had views, and the most exclusive ones stood right on the river. Pheasant construction got its start in the neighborhood. Our reputation for quality and workmanship became well known. The demand for our services was high, and some of the wealthy clients were willing to pay well for our services, and some were waiting for us to show up. It was early December, and Angel and I were trying to get our latest project in order. The porch roof needed complicated angles joined. I called Iris, and she said she wanted to see everything in person, so she came to the job site. She and I inspected the porch, and she brought the plans. She described the roof line in detail, and now I understood how we wanted to build this particular structure. We walked through the house together. Iris is in her early 20s, tall, about 5 feet tall, with a pleasant appearance. Not too much makeup, but I wouldn't call her earthy. An attractive, tomboyish girl, slender, with slight feminine curves, but she didn't dress in a way that showed off that healthy body. I asked her how she liked working at the Pheasant. "I love it. I love designing custom luxury homes. When I think about the other guys I went to architecture school with designing hospitals and sewage systems, it all seems so boring compared to what I do," she told me. "Well, you're good at what you do, and I'm glad you like it here," I said. "Thank you. There are only a few things that bother me. The first is my mom," she said. "Oh?" I asked, not intending to say too much about her mom. "She's so meticulous about everything, worrying over the smallest details. And oh my God, she tries so hard to patronize me. I'm not a child. I'm a 26-year-old grown woman," she added. I didn't say anything but agreed with her comments. "One more thing, Uncle Marsh," she said. "I know he's a good businessman and the company is doing well, but to him, profit is all that matters. I believe that if you create good products at a reasonable price, the money will come by itself." I just nodded. I was actually in agreement with what she was saying. Philosophically, we were in complete agreement. It would be nice to have an ally in the company. The following week, Marshall called and invited Tracy and I to return to the villa in Cabo the first week of January. By then, Angel and I would have easily finished the house in River Ridge, and this trip could be what would get Tracy and I back on track, and the timing was perfect. When I told Tracy about it, she was beyond thrilled. She hugged me, kissed me, and talked about buying a new swimsuit. This revitalization in her mood continued throughout the holiday season. It was like we were back to the old days when we were so focused on each other. I decided I needed to take vacations more often. The villa was just as we remembered it, and we were thrilled to be in tropical Mexico. The weather was warm and beautiful, and we had a wonderful view of the blue ocean from the deck. Tracy was looking forward to wearing her new bathing suits. That first morning, we decided to take a walk on the beach. I hadn't seen any of her new suits, so I was a little shocked when she walked onto the beach. "You don't like it?" she asked with a wait-and-see look on her face. "No, honey, you look great," I told her. "But I think others will see things in you that only I should see." I continued. I smiled slightly as I said this. I didn't want her to be upset. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "It's okay, we're on vacation. I'll put on my raincoat." And we went for a walk. Soon the blanket was off. I relaxed a little, realizing that we would never see these people again. After a while, the heat made us thirsty, and I asked Tracy if she wanted water or something. I went over to one of the beach houses and got some drinks while Tracy swam in the ocean. When I returned with the drinks, I saw two young guys, fraternity members, standing next to Tracy and talking. These guys were in good shape and probably 6, 7 years younger than Tracy. When I returned, I handed her a can of Coke. The guys were polite and left pretty quickly. When I asked her what was up, she said they were just asking where she was from and how long she had lived here. I can't blame the guys, she looks incredible. I was a little bothered by the way she flirted back at them. After lunch, we spent time on the sun deck. Marshall seemed to be paying extra attention to Tracy. It bothered me a little that Marshall had seen her in such a state. I get it. We were on vacation and I'd certainly seen his wife topless, but Tracy was my wife and this was somehow different. I'm not sure exactly why. Another thing that bothered me was that Marshall continued to give Tracy extra attention. Tracy seemed to enjoy it, giggling at his comments. I've watched Marshall turn on the charm more than once in business situations when he wants something. He's good at it, and he usually gets his way. I saw something similar here in Mexico. That evening after dinner, Tracy and I sat on the small balcony outside our bedroom and watched the sunset. Despite my misgivings about flirting, the day went well. Sitting down in a chair, Tracy began rubbing my shoulders and neck. After a while, she gently threw a scarf over my eyes, tied it, and I was blindfolded. After 15 pleasant minutes, the blindfold is removed and I catch a glimpse of my surroundings. Tracy, the palm trees swaying in the tropical evening, and was there movement from Marshall's balcony? At the end of the week, Marshall and I broke protocol and discussed business. Now we could in good conscience write off most of the trip. Marshall thinks we need to hire a few more carpenters. Kevin, our brand is at its peak right now. Our plans are already scheduled many months in advance. We have verbal commitments on 4 more homes in River Ridge. I'd like to finish all 4 this year, he said. This year, I exclaimed. Angel and I will start Juniper 552 after we get back, and we'll be lucky if we finish another big novel this year. There's no way we'll even finish 3. Isn't the one on the canyon custom made? I asked. Yes, the bridge, he said. Kevin, listen, I have a plan. A guy I play golf with, my own brother, is moving to Central Oregon in February. I talked to him on the phone. He's a construction worker. He seems to know what he's doing and has a crew. Apparently, he's been building houses in Houston for a while now. Don't worry, you're still in charge. He'll report to you. I see you and Angel are doing 2 houses and the new guys are doing the other 2. He smiled and patted me on the shoulder. Great, I thought. We have an elite brand to protect. Now I'm in charge of these new guys whose skills I have no idea about. I can already feel the stress and tension. All too soon, we were back in Central Oregon. It seemed to Tracy that Cabo's good mood had carried over into our lives after the vacation. It was positive. Angel and I got busy with the house on Juniper Drive in River Ridge. I knew I was going to be busy this year. I promised myself that I would carve out time for Tracy and me in this busy year. The funny thing is, Tracy showed up less often than usual. Every week or 2, she would come home in the middle of the evening after dinner. Even on some weekends, she was gone for long periods of time. When I asked her about it, she said that her business was really picking up. The positive attitude persisted, and that was a good thing. This was the new confident Tracy. One day, Marshall called out of the blue and asked if I could meet him at his office after work. When I pulled up, I heard voices coming from Marshall's office, and Iris gave me a strange look, rolling her eyes. I walked in. Kevin, glad you could make it, said Marshall enthusiastically. I'd like you to meet our new employees. He continued. Kevin, this is Terry Destry, Junior Messersmith, and Ed Crump. Silently shaking their hands, I looked around the group. Destry looked like a leader. Skinny, lupine trim, with a permanent smirk on his face and half-closed eyes. I had a distinct feeling I wasn't going to like this guy. Messersmith weighed 300 pounds, fat but stout, with a shaved head. He didn't look particularly smart either. Crumpus was small and squinted, his eyes dancing. He glanced at Destry now and then, assessing the expression on his face before reacting to anything. Puppet? I really hope my initial reaction to this group was wrong. Let's grab a drink around the corner, get to know each other, and make a tentative plan, Marshall said, and I saw him pat Destry and Crump on the back as we left the office. I wanted to find out how much Destry knew about construction. I asked him about this or that construction technique, and he claimed to know it. To all my questions, he answered briefly and affirmatively. Every now and then I would say something, and Destry and Crump would giggle, as if I were some dumbass who didn't understand their inside joke. At one point, I looked over and saw Marshall talking to Junior about his vision for pheasant construction and long-term growth plans, about the brand, about our goals. Junior was looking at him with a completely blank expression on his face. Marshall might as well have been talking to a stone Buddha. The next day, I met with Angel and as soon as we agreed, went to see how Destry and company were doing. I drove up to their construction site, but no one was working there. Destry and Crumpus were smoking and Junior was eating a donut. Is the guy taking a break? I asked. I don't have any plans, boss, Destry tells me. You're the project manager, and I expect you to be on the construction site giving us orders. He says this with a challenge in his voice and a smirk on his face. I looked at him with a long, hard stare, shook my head, and sketched out my schedule for the day. From what he told me last night, this assembly shouldn't be a problem for his skills. Once they got to work, I went back to Juniper to work with Angel. By the end of the day, I was back at Destry's place of work. They had some skills and had made some progress, but it wasn't the same quality that Angel and I had. I didn't see anything in particular that they were doing wrong. Just carelessness and sloppiness that I wouldn't allow. I was now used to going to Destry's office first, making sure they had a plan for the day, and then going to Angel's office. By the end of the day, I was making a plan for the next day with Angel. It was so good with Angel that I almost didn't have to do it. Life with Tracy was good, but it was changing. Like I said, she was becoming more confident and dressing in a way that showed off her body more. Her appetite for the restaurants, bars, and stores in town seemed to increase. One evening we met for dinner at a restaurant called Pizzazz. We chatted about how our day had gone. I noticed that while talking to Tracy, her eyes would occasionally scan the room to see who was here and what they were doing. I felt like I wasn't getting her full attention. We talked about our new house and she asked about the land, the development, and the neighborhood. I decided I needed to talk to Preston about it again. I told her that I thought we were close to starting construction on the new house. I also told her that Iris was in charge of the design. As I started to give her some details, she looked at me over her shoulder and her face lit up with a wide smile. I felt a pat on my back and unmistakably recognized Marshall's greeting. What a nice surprise to meet you both here, he murmured. Kevin, he greeted me with a quick squeeze of his shoulders. And the lovely Miss Tracy, he says and puts his arm around her shoulders. As they separate, I notice her quickly inspecting her cleavage. Since when did these two develop such a friendship? I know we all hung out together in Cabo, but that was almost 3 months ago. They look like old friends or more. And Tracy just brightens up looking at Marshall. Would you like to join us? Tracy asked. Just a minute, I'm meeting some people at the bar. He grabs a free chair, pulls up next to Tracy, and starts talking. This goes on for about 15 minutes, after which he leaves to meet with his people. During this time, I estimate that for at least 12 minutes, he is completely focused on Tracy. He told her more than once how beautiful she looked. Each time, she smiled broadly in appreciation. There was a strange atmosphere emanating from this whole scene that I didn't like. On the way home, I reminded Tracy that my land deal was not something I wanted Marshall to know about. All the way home, she was uncharacteristically quiet, silently staring out the window into the night. Sunday morning, I stopped by Preston's for coffee. He was always happy to see me. I considered Preston a good friend, and he seemed to like me too. From time to time, I would ask Preston for advice, and so far he had always helped me. We talked a little about pheasant, and I told him about Destry and the Texas crowd. I also told him my thoughts on Marshall. So, son, have you ever thought about going off on your own? He asked. I told him that up until the last few months, I had really enjoyed my job at the Pheasant. I told him that Marshall was really good at what he did, and that I thought we were really building something in the business. I was hoping we would, I said. Once the county approves the development, I'll have enough reserves to start my own business, build one house a year, and focus on building a high-quality product. Ah, yes, the county. Preston sighed and raised his eyes to the ceiling as if asking for divine help. Margaret Plum, the hippie woman, is slowing down the process as we expected. The other two commissioners are ready to go. Just last week, I presented them with a new proposal. What's the new proposal? I asked. The minimum lot size is 5 acres, he said. That means fewer houses, less traffic, less pollution, and a smaller carbon footprint. Hopefully, that'll be enough to change Margaret's mind. He told me not to worry about getting a great return on my investment and to be patient. I was pleased with this because, as I said, so far Preston had always given reliable advice. I thanked him, and as I left, I asked him again about my legal defense in the LLC his attorney had set up for me. Don't worry, son. No one can take possession of this land but you. Not even your sweet little fiancé, he told me. I thought about that as I drove home. In the middle of the summer, Angel and I finished the house on Juniper Drive and started building another big house in River Ridge. Destry and Company had stalled building the house because of quality issues. The owners were not satisfied with several things about their work. Marshall called and suggested I send Angel over to help them finish the job so we could complete this project. When I told Angel about it, I realized that he was not thrilled about working with the Destry guys. On the evening of the third day of Angel's work with Destry, Angel called me. KC, I don't want to work with these guys anymore, said Angel. I didn't blame him, but I wanted to know why. Why, Angel? I asked. I just don't want to work with them. I work with you or myself, not them, he said. Then I asked him to elaborate, but he didn't want to say anything, and then I did get him to tell me. They make fun of me, call me names, bad guys. I don't want to leave you, but I don't work with them anymore. Angel told me. Damn assholes. I'd seen it happen. I had to think about it. I felt sorry for Angel. No, Angel, you're not leaving. You won't have to work with them anymore. I told him, you'll be back with me starting tomorrow. I'll take care of everything. Gracias, Casey, he said to me. The next morning I arrived at their house early. Where is Jose? Destry asked. I didn't say a word, just stood nose to nose with him and stared at him. If you damn idiots knew how to build properly, he wouldn't be here, I told Destry firmly, looking him straight in the eye. Easy, boss, get out of my space. He said it without a cheeky smirk. As the tension was building, Junior walked over. I thought about it. I didn't want to mess with that monster. I stepped aside toward the house to ease the tension a little. And just do your job right if you want to keep working here, I said. Are you threatening our jobs, boss? Destry asked. Just manage your projects from now on, said I, walking back to my truck. I heard Destry say something, but I wasn't quite sure what. And then I heard Crumpus start cackling. It sounded like you can't even handle your woman. Maybe that's what I heard. That day I thought about Tracy while I was working. She was in a good mood most of the time, but I'm not sure I was the one who put her in a good mood. She was away a lot. Sometimes all the way into the evening. Sometimes she'd come home after 9 in the evening. When I asked her questions, she gave vague answers. I know she worked hard, as I did. We often talked about our dreams and goals when we were together. However, lately it seemed like I was talking the most and she was only agreeing with me. It seemed like we were drifting apart. That night I told her all of this without accusation. I got her attention, and over the next few months things went back to normal. We spent more time together and she was in a good mood most of the time. We started spending evenings out of the house much less often. We were still a little out of sorts, but I attributed that to our frantic work schedules. I met with Iris a few times a month, mostly at our construction site so she could update me on progress, answer questions, and make sure everything was going according to plan. For extra income, Iris told me she works as a bartender at Maxine's, a nice restaurant near downtown. My uncle doesn't pay that much, but it's even fun. On weekends, I can easily make between $100 and $200 a night. Iris asked me to go with her when she was at Destry's work. He gives me the creeps, she told me. And the younger one. He looks at me like he's going to rape me at any moment. She wasn't kidding. One day in early November, leaving our construction site, she asked me a strange question. Are you and Tracy okay? She asked. Yeah, why? I asked. Fine, she said. Forget I asked. And with that, she walked away. I wonder why she asked. Tracy and I seemed to get along just fine. The pressure to do this job was enormous. The pressure was not only from the customers, who had their own deadlines, but also from Marshall. The more production he got, the more money Pheasant Construction made. My pressure was compounded by a desire to create a good product and make sure Pheasant Construction's reputation didn't suffer. After all, I was a partner. In late November, I told Tracy that the next month or so would be busier than usual. She took it calmly. The next day, Marshall called and invited us back to Cabo in January. "Marshall, how can you even suggest Cabo this year?" I asked him. "We're a few weeks behind and the homeowners are supposed to move in mid-January." "Kevin, you're the project manager. It's your job to get projects done on time. I plan to go, and I want you and Tracy to go." He spoke very calmly. I was furious. How could he in good conscience take a vacation when I was working 60-plus hours a week? "Well, I can't go. Maybe Tracy and I will take a vacation when things settle down. The other thing is that I'm spending so much time fixing your boy Destry's mistakes that it's slowing me down. We're going to have a serious discussion about all of this once I finish the project," I told him. A few days later, I got a call from Tracy. "Why didn't you tell me we were invited back to Cabo?" she asked. Apparently, she had run into Marshall somewhere and he had said something. "Tracy, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way I can get away from the work I'm doing now. Even without a vacation, it's going to take all my time to finish it by the 15th. I told her. That was the end of it. I knew she was disappointed, but there were no options. Destry and his crew didn't have enough time for a house in Canyon Ridge. I expected Tracy to be upset about Cabo, but at home that night, she was in a great mood. Perhaps she is beginning to realize that in a few months, maybe months, but no more than a few years, a lifelong dream of ours will be fulfilled. Fewer hours, less financial stress, and more time to do the things we want to do. That Saturday, Tracy planned a date night for us. Dinner out on the town and then a nice evening at home. We had a nice dinner, and as we sipped our wine, Tracy, a little nervously, started talking. "Kevin, honey, I know you're very busy right now and don't have a lot of free time, but you see, the thing is, I'm starting to slow down for winter," she told me. "Okay, I knew all that, but what was the point of all this?" "And even though you can't go, I bought a ticket for me to Cabo." At those words, she lowered her face and quickly looked up to gauge my reaction. "You're going without me?" I asked. "It's only for a few days, and I love being there, in that beautiful villa and in such fantastic weather." "They said it's okay if I come alone," she said. I remained silent. Several thoughts ran through my head. The first was Tracy walking around topless when I wasn't around. But the one that bothered me the most was the lack of self-sacrifice on her part. I thought she and I had a dream, a vision of what our lives would be like. To achieve our dreams, we often have to make sacrifices. I worked hard, and it was a sacrifice. I couldn't take a vacation, and that was a sacrifice. I had to deal with assholes like Destry, and that was a sacrifice. I hadn't seen much sacrifice from her, and now she was going to go to Cabo without me. It was so wrong that for the first time I began to doubt her loyalty to me. Along with that, I began to doubt my loyalty to her. "Okay, looks like you've made up your mind," I said. "You mean I can go?" she asked. It was like dealing with a child. "Tracy, you're an adult. You can make your own decisions." "I have to say I'm surprised and disappointed," said I. "I know," she said. "I'm disappointed too." She didn't understand my disappointment at all. She thought I was disappointed that I couldn't go. Of course, I meant disappointed in her decision to do it without me. As we walked to my car, she hugged my arm, satisfied that she had gotten her way. I wasn't happy at all. She chatted all the way home. I had nothing to say. Once home, she tried to initiate sex. "Not tonight, Tracy," I said. "It's been a long week." In all the years we'd been together, I'm not sure I'd ever turned her down for sex. She only looked at me surprised. "You don't want me?" she asked, completely discouraged. I told her not tonight. She still didn't realize that I was disappointed in her because of that trip to Cabo. In the weeks leading up to the trip, there were times when we communicated pretty well. But I was working so many hours, and most of the time I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was okay. The day she left, I told her to have a good time and that she and I would have some things to discuss after she returned. "What kind of discussion?" she asked. She had a slightly concerned look on her face. "Have a good time and then we'll discuss things," I told her. Was it cruel to bring it all down on her as she walked away? Did I want it to stay on her mind while she was on vacation? Did I want her to be unsure of my commitment to her? Absolutely. The week flew by quickly. I was able to work long hours, and we ended up finishing the house ahead of schedule, a few days before the owners were due to move in. I told Preston what was going on in my life, and he helped me make a plan for this year. I knew things would change this year, but I didn't know how much. But I would find out soon enough. Also, Preston told me that he had gotten some positive signals from the county and might have some good news soon. When Tracy got home, I noticed something had changed about her. She seemed more aloof, less involved in our relationship. Sometimes, I caught her talking quietly on her cell phone, ostensibly on business. I called Marshall and set up a meeting on Friday after work. He asked what the purpose of the meeting was, and I said, lots of things. When Marshall, Claudia, and I gathered in the office, I told them I wanted to discuss the upcoming year and some changes that needed to be made. First of all, we can't continue the schedule we had last year. Angel and I are working too many hours. I know we are paid well, but this is too much, I told them. I'm sure we can work it out, maybe even hire someone else, Marshall replied, not giving the appearance that he cared much about the topic. Well, speaking of personnel, I won't be working with Destry and his crowd this year. I won't be managing his projects, and Angel and I won't be fixing his blunders. Not anymore. I kind of raised my voice as I said this. Suddenly, I had Marshall's attention. Wait a minute, he said, becoming a little more serious. It may have taken Terry and his team a few months to figure out how we work, but we're not going to get rid of them. They're too valuable. Fine, you can keep them, I said. Neither Angel nor I will have anything to do with them, I told them. Wait, he said. Angel is an employee of Pheasant Construction, and if he's assigned to work with them, he'll work with them. Marshall's voice was rising. Furthermore, if I assign you to work with Terry or Junior or anyone else, you will work with them. Now he was yelling at me. You forget, Marshall, that I'm a partner too, I said. I have rights as an owner, and I'm using my rights in this business. Having said that, I saw Marshall look at Claudia, and she quickly looked away. There was a pause in the discussion. What? I asked. They looked at each other again, and then I saw Claudia nod toward Marshall. Kevin, you're no longer a partner, Marshall told me. He went on to tell me that when I took out the loan, it was secured by my stock. According to the Articles of Incorporation, I had to start paying off the loan. When I repaid the loan, I would get my shares back. I explained this to you during the loan processing, Claudia told me. I never brought it up. No wonder they were so willing to give out loans. I'd been busting my ass at Pheasant Construction for the last 2 years, thinking I owned it. But I was no different than Junior or Crump, just an hourly employee. I see, I said, standing up. I was so angry that I needed to leave. I was afraid of what I might do. Kevin, we can certainly continue to discuss some of these issues, Marshall spoke as I left the office. Kevin, Iris called out to me as I was leaving, but I didn't trust myself to say a word to her. That night, I really wanted to discuss the future with Tracy. I hoped that she would be there for me during this difficult time and that we could plan our future. By 7 o'clock, she still wasn't home. She wasn't answering her voicemail or texts. I needed to find out. I had planned to talk to Angel. I owed him a debt of gratitude, but I was sure my days at the Pheasant were over. All my trust in Marshall was gone. Claudia came up with a plan to get me out as partner. Meanwhile, I was working 50, 60 hours or more each week. All my effort and stress was degrading Pheasant Construction's reputation. Tracy finally showed up a little after 9 o'clock. I was confused. I wanted to talk to her about everything, but at the same time, I was annoyed that she showed up so late and didn't tell me anything. When I asked her where she had been, she became defensive and never gave me a coherent answer. At that moment, the mood between us was not good. I couldn't envision a scenario where I could get the support I needed to discuss the future. I went to bed upset with Tracy and she wouldn't talk to me either. The next day, I went to see Angel. He was the one I was most worried about. If I left, would he be able to continue working at the Pheasant, with Destry treating him like this? I sat down with Angel and explained that I was leaving and why. He nodded and understood. I asked him if he would be okay, and he said he would. He was a tough guy. Then he asked what I was going to do. You know, Angel, I'm going to start my own carpentry business. It's going to take some time to get it up and running, but I'm sure I can succeed at it. I told him. And I can't do it right away, but if you can keep it going for a few months, I'd love for us to work together again, I said. He smiled and said he wanted that too. You'll tell me when you're ready to accept me, Casey, he told me. I hugged him as I walked away. It went better than I expected. I had quite a bit of cash that I was going to spend on financing my new house. So cash wouldn't be a problem. I would just wait a few more months before I started setting up my new place. Now I needed to quit pheasant construction. I called Marshall on Sunday. I was all set to leave him a voicemail, but he surprised me by answering. Kevin, I'm so glad you called. I hadn't even spoken yet. I know we had some disagreements on Friday, but everything can be worked out. He continued in his most convincing voice. When I finally got a chance to talk to Marshall, I simply said, Marshall, I am resigning immediately. That was all I could say. Kevin, you're not resigning. He said it in his most confident voice. You and I are going to sit down and work this out. Where are you? Let's have lunch and work this out. He continued. Marshall, I'm done. I'm never working with you again, I told him. And then he went on about how we had a backlog of work that needed to be done. How could I leave our company after all these years? There was no limit to his indignation. Then to tease him, I said, Marshall, I'm sure Terry Destry and his team, with all their skill, can easily handle all the work. After all, just a few days ago you were telling me how good they are, didn't you? I couldn't help myself. I was still so angry at this guy. A pause hung on the line, as if we were digesting what I had said, and my sarcasm. You son of a bitch, he hissed at me. After everything I've done for you, you'll never get a job in this town again. Hell, you won't even be able to satisfy your woman. He said it with a sarcastic smirk. I hung up the phone. My woman? What was that all about? Why had he dragged Tracy into this? Had something happened in Cabo with Tracy? I needed to find out. A strange coincidence happened on my way home. Driving past a popular cafe, I saw Belinda Fizan's car parked out front. She drives a white BMW X1 with license plates, Belinda. I pulled over. Maybe she could tell me what might have happened in Cabo. I saw Belinda sitting alone, fiddling with her iPhone. I sat down across from her. I think I startled her with my suddenness. Jesus, Kevin, what the hell are you doing here? She asked without much friendliness or warmth. I was surprised to see that she was as pale as I was. Even after a week or so, one would expect some of the bronze to remain. Belinda, can I ask you a couple questions? She just looked at me. I took that as a yes. Did you go to Cabo this year with Marshall? Do I look like I've been to Cabo? She asked, throwing her hands up in the air to demonstrate the paleness of her skin. I sat stunned, digesting the meaning of what she said. I left Marshall in November. I live in one of the condos in Forest Meadow, she told me. Sad, and I think your little wifey has something to do with it. She continued. I never caught them, but she was around a lot. He said he was helping her with the business. I think he was helping her, but business had nothing to do with it. She said. So wait a minute. You say you saw Tracy and Marshall together? I asked. Together? Yes, very often. It started sometime last year when I started noticing her hanging around somewhere. Before I left him, my spies told me they saw them together in bars and restaurants all the time. And even when I didn't hear from them, he often didn't come home until the evening. She continued. A couple times I was told that his car was parked outside some of the houses Pheasant was building after hours. When you drive a big white Suburban with red Pheasant logos, it's really hard to sneak in there unnoticed, she told me. I just sat there stunned. All those late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the time away from home, and then all those comments from everyone. I must be the only idiot who didn't realize what was going on. I got up to leave without saying a word. My thoughts were like a blur. You're not still with her, are you? She called out to me as I walked away. As I walked away, I quietly said to myself, No, I guess not. On the way home, I struggled with my emotions. I felt so sad and hurt for my wife and former business partner employer. How could they do this to me? But as I traveled, my emotions began to change, from sadness to anger. Anger partly at Tracy, but mostly at Marshall. When I thought about Tracy, one thing I liked about her was her simple, trusting innocence. And one thing I kept noticing about Marshall was his persuasiveness and manipulativeness. Tracy never stood a chance. I know that doesn't excuse her behavior, but it pretty much explains it. When I got home, the Corolla was parked in the driveway. Okay, let's deal with this, I thought. When I entered the house, Tracy was sitting there, professionally dressed, hair combed, makeup applied. She stared at me with a guilty expression on her face. Who went to Cabo? I asked, trying to remain calm. Nah. She stared at me, then looked away sharply, then lowered her eyes. Eventually, she told me that it was just her and Marshall there. She admitted to having sex with him at the villa in Cabo. When I asked if they had intimacy before Cabo, she said, maybe 2 or 3 times. I realized it was more like 10 or 20. I exploded and started yelling at her. She was crying and apologizing the whole time. I stopped mocking her and asked her why. He told me he loved me. She sobbed. Truth be told, it hurt, but not as much as I thought it would. Ever since she told me she was going to Cabo without me, I had been subconsciously planning an exit strategy. Many people will ask, why did I let her go? Why didn't I drop everything and go too? Why didn't I fight for her? The answer is somewhere near. Deep down, I knew it wasn't going to work out. In a weird way, I even sympathized with Tracy. Maybe I was forcing a lifestyle on her that she didn't want. She said she was going to Marshall's, and I went for a walk around the grounds. I told her I'd be back in half an hour and that I'd look forward to her absence. I refused to hug her goodbye. As I reflected on my life, I thought I had it all. A beautiful wife, a partnership in a growing business, a career I was good at and enjoyed, business partners I could work with, and finally the opportunity to become financially independent because of the land I owned. Now all I had was land, and not for sure. As I said, I was saddened by the loss, but most of all, I was angry at Marshall for ruining everything. I blamed him. For the next 4 or 5 weeks, I did almost nothing. I drank a lot and felt sorry for myself. I didn't exercise, I led a sloppy lifestyle. I didn't hear from Tracy and Marshall, and I didn't want to. I didn't feel good about myself. Every once in a while, I'd get a text from Iris, who was just checking up on me. And I appreciated it. And then, one Friday late afternoon, I was sitting there trying to work on my business plan, and Iris called. She said she had a new concept for my house. Suddenly, I felt excited and motivated. I wanted to see her new plans. Maybe I could even start implementing them, I thought. She said she was working at Maxine's, but she had plans with me. I told her I would meet her at Maxine's. Kevin, can you drive? She asked. I'm fine, I told her. I've only had one drink. Well, maybe 2 or 3. I need to be more careful driving. About halfway to town, I assessed the situation. I probably should have cleaned up a bit before driving to Maxine's. I was in sweatpants, work boots, and a long-sleeve t-shirt. I hadn't shaved in a few days and probably needed a shower. Not the best image of a typical Maxine's customer. Maxine's has a nice wood-paneled bar. It's not a place for a refreshment, more of a celebration or romantic dinner. It's not common to see people in jackets and ties or women's dresses here. It's not dark, but there is mood lighting for a martini or a glass of Pinot Noir. I was a little embarrassed at my scruffy appearance and apologized to Iris for it. She looked at me carefully and said, "Don't worry, we're not too busy yet, but you could definitely use some tidying up." I asked her for the plans, and when she gave them to me, I got up to leave. Kevin, stay for a minute. I'm slow right now. Take a look and tell me what you think of the house, she said. Let me get you a cup of coffee. I can stay for a couple minutes. How about a whiskey and soda? I asked. She looked at me silently for a long time, but still brought me my drink. She had a customer at the other end of the bar and had come out to help him. As I sipped my drink and contemplated her plans, I heard the door open and saw Iris look up worriedly. Then I heard it. It was Marshall, Destry, and 2 other cowboys. He saw me at once, and the group came toward him. What the hell were they doing at Maxine's? I saw Iris watching them anxiously. Well, 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 if it isn't good old Kevin, he said. What's up, buddy? He said, and looked me over from head to toe with a wide grin on his face. I didn't say a word. A little celebration for our company. He continued. This week we signed contracts for 3 new homes in River Ridge. Business, as they say, is booming. He laughed. You seem a little out of it, Kevin. Are you okay? He asked with mocking sincerity. Crumpus and Destry chuckled. I said to Iris, I have to go. I'll talk to you later. ignoring Marshall and his crowd. When I stood up, Marshall stood right in my space and said, "I'll tell Tracy I saw you. She's home right now waiting for me." With a knowing smile, he threw that in my face. This elicited another laugh from the group. I think it was a combination of my hatred for Marshall, humiliation in front of the three scumbags, and disrespect for Tracy. I punched him in the face, knocking him to the ground. Junior quickly grabs me from behind, clutching my arms, and that's when Destry shows up. He slaps me, hitting me with a right to left, right to left, right to left, right to left. As Marshall gets up, he yells to his guys, "Pin his arms to the bar." Junior holds me down. Destry grabs one arm and Crumpus grabs the other. Junior squeezes me, and I can barely move, resting my hands on the bar. Sister Joan taught me a lesson in Catholic school. Swollen knuckles learn lessons. Marshall hissed at me, and with those words, he lowered the beer bottle onto my left hand. I had the strength to move it, but it was still really stiff and it hurt. At that moment, Iris and a couple waiters jumped up to us. "Get out of here!" she yells. For a moment, I think she's addressing me, but no. She's looking at Marshall and the others. Junior lets go of me with a shove, and they walk quickly and silently to the door. She looks at me and tells me to sit at a small table by the door to the kitchen, away from the other customers. Back at the bar, things quickly return to normal. I am completely humiliated and my arm is really hurting. One of the waiters brings me some ice. Getting an insult from Marshall, a crack on the knuckles, and then a slap from Destry was humiliating. On top of it all, I looked at myself. I looked pathetic, unshaven, in sloppy clothes, with a bleeding arm and half drunk. Embarrassing. Iris came over. "I'll give you a ride." I start to protest and she tells me, "You've been drinking, you're in pain and you're emotional. Don't even think about it." She looks at me with a long, hard stare. Shortly after that, I see none other than Preston Balfour walk into Maxine's. I see Iris point to the corner I'm in, and he walks over. "Come on, son," he says to me, and we walk out. We drive home in silence. Now I'm ashamed of Preston too. I feel like I've really hit rock bottom. We pull over and he says, "Clean yourself up and I'll see you in the morning." Saturday morning came and Preston showed up around 7:30. Luckily, I had already showered, shaved, and dressed. We have a long conversation, first about life in general, but gradually we start talking about my life, some of my mistakes, and then the future. "Son, I want to tell you something a man once told me." He pauses and sighs deeply. "You see, I used to love to play cards. To tell you the truth, I wasn't very good at it. One night I lost all my rent and food money for the month. I sat on the front steps and felt sorry for myself. Then this old man sat down on the steps next to me. I started telling him how unlucky I was and how I kept getting bad cards. 'Partner,' he said to me, 'there's one thing you have to remember about cards. We can't control the cards that come our way, but when they fall out to us, our job is to play them the best way we can.' As he got up to leave, he said, 'That's for life too,' and walked away. I never forgot that advice and never gambled again. After a while, Preston left, but I never forgot his words. The situation gradually improved. I began to take care of myself first and foremost. I finished my business plan. I vowed to give up alcohol, and mostly I kept to myself. Once or twice a week, I'd get texts and calls from Iris, and I'd talk to Preston. He helped me register my business, Casey Custom Carpentry, as an LLC. My anger at Tracy was replaced with sadness about what we had and what was gone. I was sad about us not being together and the life path she might choose. Poor, naive Tracy, seduced by that sociopath. My anger at Marshall burned bright and hot. Only I hadn't figured out how to get my revenge yet. One evening, Preston called and invited me over to his place. We gathered in his office, which I had built, and I noticed an open bottle of champagne. "Are we celebrating?" I asked as he poured me a glass of bubbly. "Yes, as a matter of fact, we are," he said. "My friend at the county commission said they voted to expand the zoning to R5. All of your property and most of mine will get that zoning on June 1st. We toasted and talked about what it all meant. It was a joyful conversation. After all, I was going to be rich, or at least wealthy. We also talked about my life and the twists and turns it had taken in the last year or so. I told stories, and Preston just listened. Eventually, I started talking about Marshall and what a bad man he was. When I was about to leave, I hugged Preston, thanked him, and told him what a good friend he was. He just nodded his thanks. He stood on the porch as I walked to my car. From the porch, he said, "Son, you know something needs to be done about him." "Who?" I asked. "You know who," he said, turned and walked into the house. 3 days later, I got an unexpected phone call. "I'm looking for a custom home in the River Ridge neighborhood. I've been given your name," he said. He introduced himself as Fairchild Reese. We agreed to meet at his lot the next day. We ended up looking at the lot and I drew up my offer. I had a good markup, but I really wanted to do this project. I submitted the proposal, we haggled and came to an agreement. I later learned that he had originally contracted with Pheasant, but backed out after seeing some of their recent work. I have a strong suspicion that this recommendation came from Iris, but she doesn't want to admit it. I called Angel to discuss the possibility. We agreed to meet at the River Ridge construction site on Saturday morning. We toured the site and familiarized ourselves with the plans. Angel asked a couple questions and gave some ideas about the construction. Everything he said made sense. I told him that the Reeses had money, that they were special, but seemed reasonable. Finally, I asked Angel, "So, are you ready to leave the Pheasant and work with me?" He looked at me, lowered his eyes, thought for a minute, and agreed. I hugged Angel, so excited to be working with him again. "KC, I need you to look at something," Angel says to me. Angel seems to doubt that River Ridge Pheasant is currently under construction. The site spans the canyon, and a bridge was planned to connect the sites on the east and west sides of the canyon. Destry and his crew were building the bridge. Angel was in the process of finishing the house to bring it up to code. When he saw the bridge, he had his doubts. When he tried to question Destry about it, he was told to shut up and mind your own business. I asked if Marshall or Destry would be at the construction site today. Angel told me, "No way. I guess you can never confuse this group with workaholics." We went to the construction site. It was not that far from the Reese's store, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. Like Angel said, there was no one there. We walked up to the bridge. There was a small shelf about 4 feet from the edge of the canyon. The full depth of the canyon was 40 or 50 feet. Angel led me over to the shelf so we could look at the bridge structure from the underside. "Look, KC," he pointed to the joints. "Just screws, no metal plates. They'll break, and this bridge will kill someone," Angel told me with deep concern. He was right. This bridge would not pass any inspection. The entire structure was in jeopardy. The county was so far behind in building inspection that it would be months before anyone would see it. When I looked at the structure, it looked like typical Destry work. Low quality, just enough to survive. Enough to survive the first warranty year. And certainly not designed for the long term. "Angel, forget it. Let's go," I said. "Casey?" he asked, looking at me with concern. I told him that we had to leave. I also told him to quit Pheasant immediately and never come back to that construction site again. I began to ponder a few things. 2 days later, I got a phone call. It said Tracy on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer. "Hi, how are you doing?" I asked. In a quiet voice, I heard, "Kevin, I think I'm in trouble. Can you meet me?" She said, "Where's Marshall?" Unable to resist, I asked her. Then she started sobbing. "Kevin, please," she gasped. "I met her in town and she told me she was scared. Scared of what she had gotten herself into. When I asked her to explain, she said it was a long story and she didn't want to stay in town. Someone might see her. I told her to follow me to my house, our old place. On the way, I made a phone call. When we arrived, I told her to put the car behind the old store, away from prying eyes. We entered the house and I asked Tracy to tell me what was going on. She was visibly upset and shaking. She told me the following. Marshall was charming at first. Took her out to dinner, bought her clothes. He treated her well. I hated to hear it, but at the same time I had a perverse curiosity, wanting to know the whole story. It seems things started to change after her last trip to Cabo. She was no longer respected. He didn't ask her out as often, he was just waiting for satisfaction for himself. According to her, she didn't understand what was going on. Marshall told her he loved her. Then last night, Marshall took her out to a nice dinner, turned on the charm and asked her if she loved him. She said she did. He told her that he was having problems at work and needed her help. She replied that she was willing to help in any way she could. He told her that Destry and his boys were going back to Texas and he needed them to stay. He had a lot of things piling up. She just looked at him, wondering how she could help. He told her that if she was friendly with them, they would stay at the Pheasant. At first, she didn't understand what he was asking, but eventually it came to her. She had to entertain Destry, Crump, and Junior to persuade them to stay. When she told me about it, silent tears were running down her cheeks. I asked her where Marshall thought she was, and she replied that she had told him that her mother was ill and that she would spend a few days with her. On her return, she was to attend to Destry and his boys. She did not know what to do. I wanted to make things clear for her. We won't be together again, I told her. Too much has happened. But I would help her. I just didn't know how at the time. We ended up talking for a long time. She was crying and wishing she'd never been there for Marshall. I told her I agreed, but you can't change what has already happened. No. We talked about happier times and laughed about some things. It was comfortable and friendly. It was probably one of the most open and honest conversations we have ever had. We paused for a moment, and I wondered if I should ask the next question, but curiosity took over, and I asked her. Tracy told me about the game of hide-and-seek. What was it? I asked with a smile. It seemed like a safe and easy topic to me. She lowered her eyes. She was silent for probably a full 2 minutes. I figured she just wasn't going to answer. Finally, in a whisper, in a voice an octave or two higher, childlike, she told me the story. My father lived with us. He wasn't home a lot. He drove a truck. I wondered what that had to do with my question. I didn't say anything, just listened. When he was home, he was often angry. Mom told me not to make him angry. When he played with me, I was so happy. She continued in a little girl's voice. We lived in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Prairie View. I think I was about 4 years old. It was a big house. He liked to play hide and seek with me. One day I asked him to play with me. He was in a bad mood, but finally he said he would play. I hid, and he never came looking for me. I never saw him again. He left us, and my mom blamed me. And that was all she said. After a moment I asked, I needed to know, why were you naked when we played? She sat like that for a minute or two, and I could see she was straining to think. Finally, she looked me straight in the eye and said, because he liked me so much. Oh my God, I just sat there speechless and stared at her. Poor, sweet, spoiled little girl. It explained so many things. I wanted to hug her and protect her and tell her everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't. It wouldn't be fair to anyone. At that moment, I saw the glow of headlights flicker into the store. Iris was here. On the way home, I called Iris. I needed her help. When Iris walked in, Tracy became alarmed. What is she doing here? She asked. Tracy, I said calmly and soothingly. Iris will help. But she's Marshall's niece, she stammered. Tracy, don't worry, Iris said. I hate my uncle. I won't work with him or my mom anymore. I'm here to help you. Iris explained. I needed Iris to stay with Tracy while I did some more errands. I didn't want Tracy to be alone. After listening to her story, I realized that we needed to get Tracy out of Central Oregon and that she needed professional help. I had a friend in the valley, a mental health professional, who I would call tomorrow. I had a plan. It was risky. I couldn't let anyone find out about my plans. Well, maybe just one person. Iris put Tracy to bed in the master bedroom and we talked. I explained the whole story to Iris. By the time I was done, she was furious with her uncle. I told her what I needed from her and she agreed. If all went well, Iris would take Tracy to the valley in a day or two. I asked Tracy about her cell phone. She looked for it, but said she must have lost it. She did that from time to time, so I wasn't surprised. I searched her car and found it under the driver's seat. I could use it. The next morning, while everyone was still awake, I had coffee with Preston. I had unwittingly started this conversation with Preston. There are times in life when you have to trust people. This was one of those moments for me. I told him I would see him tomorrow night. In the morning, I called my friend in the valley. I told him what Tracy was going through and asked for his help. He gave me a name. After 3 or 4 more appeals, many hours spent on the phone, mostly on hold, we found a treatment facility for Tracy. It cost some money, but there was no question that it had to be done, and I was paying. We arranged for Iris to take her to the valley the next morning. Iris said she had college friends there and planned to stay with them for a few days. That's good. Taking Tracy's cell phone, I set the trap. An hour later, I got the response I was hoping for. In the middle of the afternoon, I loaded up my truck and drove to Preston's, leaving my bright red truck with the fresh Casey Custom Carpentry logo right in front of Preston's house. We talked for a while, and then he handed me the keys to his old gray, shabby Tacoma ranch truck, a vehicle as conspicuous as a tumbleweed in the desert. I grabbed my duffel bag and stuffed it into the Tacoma. With nervous anger, I touched down. By the time I finished the 3-4 mile hike to the base of the bridge, dusk had already descended. I didn't see a soul. I was dressed in all black. I kept checking for cameras, but everything was still too undeveloped. I was safe. I crept up to the ledge under the bridge Destry had built by the new house on Canyon. Carefully, I climbed up onto the frame, holding onto the near side of the frame. The far side was a problem, and it would only get worse from here. My saw had cut through the screws and some of the supports had shifted a bit. There were a few nervous moments, but everything held, just barely. Now, the framing on the far side of the bridge was just resting against the 4x6 girders. In high winds, the bridge could have collapsed. I then attached a rope to the near end of the 4x6 girder. I crawled back to the safe ledge and looked at my watch. 18:15. I pulled out Tracy's phone and checked the messages. One was from Marshall. "On my way, babe. Can't wait to see you." And then I looked at the previous message. Then 6:30 at Canyon House Coup. And then at the one I'd sent earlier. I studied the way she texted back to mimic the way she texted him. "Marsh, honey, my mom is driving me crazy and I miss you. I was hoping we could play a game at the Canyon House. We can meet there Friday night. I can probably be there between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. I then deleted the message history. It was getting cooler, and it was pitch dark. There weren't any streetlights around, but my eyes were getting used to the darkness, adjusting. There weren't many sounds, but it was pretty quiet. I grabbed a few rocks just in case. I also grabbed a piece of pressure-treated 2x4 lumber. I was ready to head out. Now I was waiting. It didn't take long to wait. I heard the Suburban pull up. He had some old rock song from the 90s playing on the radio in his car. I always hated that kind of music. And then there was silence as he turned off the car. He whistled as he walked across the bridge. As he crossed the bridge, the section I was working on shifted a little, but it held. I saw the lights come on in the house as he entered it. I thought about this house, but it still wasn't finished. Destry really was a shitty builder. I tied a rope around a small, thick tree on the far side of my ledge. It would give me leverage when I pulled it. Tracy called out to me, "You're still coming?" It was 6:55. I didn't answer. 7:10. "Where the hell are you?" Marshall Pheasant doesn't like to be kept waiting. A few minutes later, the house lights went out, and I heard the door slam. Showtime. This time, he crosses the bridge without whistling. Halfway across, to back up, I throw a handful of pebbles on the far side of the bridge. I see him pause and turn at the noise. This distracts his attention, and I manage to remove the slack in the rope so he doesn't notice the movement. I timed it perfectly. I pulled the rope with confidence and determination, and the 4x6 bridge collapsed into the canyon. The long end of the bridge was now unsupported by anything, and it too began to collapse and fall. As the long end of the bridge collapses into the canyon, Marshall amazingly leaps across the void and grabs onto the secure short end of the bridge. He holds on. "Help! Help!" he yells. Then he tries to stand up. Marshall was once a strong man, but now he has gotten heavier and is not as strong as he used to be. There's no way he can bring himself to stand up. I decide to speed things up. "Hey, Marshall," I say, "who is this, Kevin? Kevin, you have to help. The bridge is down, help me up." He yells. "Marshall, do you remember what you said to me last time?" I ask. "Kevin, for God's sake, I'm beginning to crave," he begs. Adrenaline was raging through me, but I felt absolutely no remorse. With my iPhone flashlight, I examined the ledge to make sure there was no sign of my presence. I threw a 2x4 log down into the canyon. Despite the cool evening, I was covered in sweat. An hour later, I was back at Preston's. I didn't even bother to go inside, but threw my gear in the truck and drove off. The next few days passed without much incident. I talked to Iris, and now Tracy was in a treatment facility called Willows. She would be there for at least 60 days. I was paying, and it wasn't cheap. Preston and I met on Saturday morning and walked around his lot a bit. We talked about life, then moved on to the county court decision and plans in case all of this happens. Finally, back at his house, he told me how Friday night he and I ordered 2 large pizzas with delivery from Smokey Dean's in town. He gave the driver a $40 tip, just to make sure he remembered us. As the driver was leaving, Preston asked him if they had hit the fender of the red truck out front. Carrier and Preston inspected it and realized there was no dent. Preston apologized for his accusations. He must have remembered seeing my truck. As I turned to leave, Preston asked, "So?" I looked him in the eye, nodded quickly, then turned and walked away. We didn't talk about it again. Monday morning, Angel and I are working at the Reese's construction site on River Ridge. Mid-morning, we hear sirens and a flurry of activity near our construction site. I guess what's going on, but pay no attention to it. By evening, it's all over the news. A powerful local builder dies in a construction accident. And so it goes. Terrible fall, unknown circumstances, tragic death. Iris calls, and though she's grown to despise her uncle, he's still her uncle. She says she's moving back to Central Oregon. A few more calls from mutual acquaintances, and I make appropriate remarks, but mostly ignore all the noise. After all, Angel and I have a house to build. About a week later in the middle of the afternoon, a new black sedan pulls up to our construction site. 2 men got out of it. One was from CCB, the Builders Council, and the other was from the county attorney's office. They wanted to talk to Angel. Even though they didn't want me there, I stayed close to Angel. They were investigating the construction site where Marshall died. They were asking specifically about the bridge. Angel told them he had nothing to do with that construction. He even voiced his concerns to Terry Destry, he said, but was told to mind his own business. Apparently, they didn't believe Angel. I went to get something from my truck. It was a copy of a magazine with a picture of the house that Angel and I had built a few years ago, hinging it over a dried-up creek bed. I showed them the article. It was an example of the quality of work Angel had done on a project like this. I explained it to them. The ADAs memorized the article. Then they asked about Destry, Crump, and Junior. Angel gave them his honest opinion and frankly took them calmly. When I had a spare moment, I gave my thoughts on their poor quality. I was less diplomatic. They said the case could end up with these 3 being banned from building in Oregon, and there was a possibility that manslaughter charges would be filed. They thanked us and left. Angel and I continued our successful work on Reese's house. It's late Friday night, I'm working with the saw, and a gray pickup truck with a club cab pulls up to the job site. The 3 doors open and Terry Destry, Ed Crump, and Junior Messersmith step out. Destry walks in front. "You got a big mouth, Cotton," Destry says as he walks toward me, and the other 2 step on his heels. He looms over me. A quick glance shows Angel is inside watching. "I was just telling the truth. Sometimes the truth can hurt," I tell him. I know it's unwise to piss him off, but I hate the bastard. "Well, we've been banned from building in this damn state, so we're going back to Texas," he tells me. "Before we leave, the guys and I have a little unfinished business with you. I believe you owe me one. I never got around to entertaining your wife." He said this, and Crumpus laughed. I noticed Angel rounding the corner from the back of the house. The 3 approached. I'd been in this place before, at Maxine's. And then I saw Angel toss a 25-foot Stanley Fat Max measuring tape at Junior. It jingled against the hairless back of his head. Junior spun in place, stunned and enraged. Angel, nimble and quick, cuts the distance and delivers a steel boot kick to Junior's balls. His eyes bulge, his mouth folds into a wordless "oh," and he falls like a giant mahogany tree. A modern-day David and Goliath situation. Angel turns to Crump and the latter runs off, cackling, with Angel trailing behind him. As I watch Angel pounce on Crump, Destry strikes first. A brutal overhand right that would have knocked me down if I hadn't reflexively tucked my chin. But it still hurts. I'm stunned, and he tries a combo, left to right. I cover up, but the bastard's fast. A few punches miss. He continues to advance, and I back away. He thinks because I'm not hitting back, he's got the advantage. If anyone remembers the Foreman and Ali fight, Rumble in the Jungle, Ali had his own strategy. Let big old George Foreman throw a lot of punches and wear himself out. Ali entered the fight in the last few rounds and defeated an exhausted Foreman. I certainly wasn't comparing myself to Ali, but I started to notice that Destry was getting tired. Smoking is bad for your lungs. As he continued to throw punches, his hands seemed to droop. So far, I hadn't thrown a single punch. Suddenly, sensing his fatigue, I threw a straight right punch that hit him in the left eye. This stunned him. He raised his arms, and I hit him right in the stomach. Then 2 more punches to the head. He tried to grab me in a clinch. I pulled back and kicked him in the balls. Not as good a kick as Angels in the junior category, but that was all it took. He fell into a fetal position. I called the police, but before they got there, Destry had time to crawl to the truck and run off with Junior. I never saw Crump or the other 2 assholes again. As we left the construction site, I thanked Angel for saving me from Junior, looked at him, and asked, "How would you feel about becoming a partner in the construction business?" He laughed and shook my hand. Epilogue. After all that had happened, Pheasant's construction had fallen into disrepair. Claudia asked me if I wanted to buy it. I told her I wanted nothing to do with the business. No thank you. We renamed our business to K&A Custom Carpentry. Things are going well. We've taken on a few jobs that used to be pheasantry projects. Tracy has gotten a lot better. She lives in the valley. She has a boyfriend. We've met him a couple times. His name is Claude Barron. His name is Bear. Big, bearded, quiet guy. He's devoted to Tracy. I know people ask why I'm not mad at Tracy for her betrayal. Having lived through the trauma of her childhood, I sympathize with her and protect her more than anything else. She seems almost like a little sister to me now. The county zoning is passed, and aside from the construction business, most of my time is spent on that. Preston has become my best friend. And then there's Iris. We're close. We share a lot of the same interests. She does most of the design work for Angel and me. She designs for others and sometimes works hourly on our pieces. It's a bit of an odd relationship because of our history and my history with her family. But we're growing closer. We're taking it slow, but I can't imagine my life without her. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.